Over the last few years, there have been several publications in the scientific literature on the subject of obesity in dogs and cats, where the authors have tried to shoehorn in a witty pun in the title. Titles such as Obesity in Pets, a Growing Problem, or Obesity in Dogs, It's a Weighty Issue. And I have participated in a roundtable discussion, which I came up for the title for, which was something on the line of chewing the fat about obesity with blah, 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 blah. None of these are particularly funny. And the risk is that they make, well, I was going to say make light of, but I'll avoid that pun, that they don't take seriously enough the problem of obesity in dogs and cats. Obesity is the second most common disease that affects pet dogs and cats in the developed world, second only to dental disease. Now, it may not be still increasing in prevalence or how common it is. It may even have reached something of a plateau in the developed world. But it's still a very sobering and worrying fact that more than half of the dogs that are owned in New Zealand, Australia, America, the UK, and across Europe, more than half of them have more body fat than is healthy. And that excess body fat is causing and contributing to disease. The list of diseases that are associated with obesity gets longer and longer every year. Osteoarthritis would be one of the most common. And it's not just about the extra weight that obesity causes. Obesity causes a systemic change in their hormonal production and the way that the joints and cartilage respond to those hormones, resulting in a significantly increased risk of osteoarthritis as the animals age and an acceleration of their disease once they develop osteoarthritis. In cats, obesity increases the risk of diabetes significantly. And in both species, there are a number of cancers which are increased in likelihood if the animal is obese. Animals with respiratory disease, if they become obese, their respiratory disease is made worse. This is easy to understand in so-called brachycephalic dogs, pugs, bulldogs, French bulldogs, and so on. If they become obese, it further decreases their capacity to expand their chest and to get air in and out. And that's a massive welfare problem. And their respiratory disease will become much better if those obese animals are enabled to become lean. Even allergic airway disease is made worse by obesity. And there are many other inflammatory diseases that are made worse or increased in risk of developing by obesity. And in the background of all health conditions is the fact that the animal's life will be shorter if it is obese. So obesity is a serious problem in dogs and cats. Now, you've probably heard in the media about these new generation of obesity drugs for treating it in humans. They are a collection of drugs known as GLP-1 agonists, an unlovely term. People may be injecting themselves with them, and soon in the future we will probably see oral drug versions of these as well. So these are a family of drugs, GLP-1 agonists, that mimic the effect of a hormone normally produced by the gastrointestinal tract as we eat. That hormone, GLP-1, or glucagon-like peptide 1. It's a hormone that leads to changes in the way that the gastrointestinal tract contracts. It changes the response of the liver to insulin. It changes the pancreatic secretion of insulin, and it changes the way that we sense the meal itself. The drug or these family of drugs are helpful in managing type 2 diabetes in people, but it is probably their effect on appetite that has resulted in their widespread use across the globe. These appetites slow down the gastrointestinal tract during and after a meal, increasing a sense of fullness. They also affect the way that the brain perceives that meal and lead to an early sensation of satisfaction or satiety. As a result, people's appetite decreases while they are taking this drug, and they are able to lose weight if they are overweight. And these drugs have been hugely successful for managing obesity and correcting type 2 diabetes in obese people. So the question has been raised, could these be developed for managing obesity in dogs and maybe even cats? Well, certainly there has been some research conducted on dogs. In fact, dogs have been used as experimental models in laboratory settings for the development of their use in humans. And dogs respond in a very similar way to these GLP-1 agonists as humans do. As I record this, there are no licensed products for use in dogs or cats. There are no veterinary products similar to the ones that we know of in humans. But I am aware that there are several patents in progress at the moment for both injectable forms, similar to the ones that are used in people, and also for oral forms, either a tablet or a capsule form. And I expect that these drugs will become available for use in dogs over the next few years. Now, they do promise success, and they're very likely to be highly successful when used in a laboratory setting, although it would be important to recognize that they are not as successful experimentally as simple calorie restriction. In other words, if you reduce the amount of intake an animal ingests in a laboratory setting, it will 100% reliably lose weight. Whereas these drugs rely on suppressing their appetite, and there's more variation, whereby some dogs will not respond as well as others. Nonetheless, in those dogs that do successfully lose body fat, that will incur a significant benefit. It will reduce the burden of disease that they are experiencing at that moment. It will reduce that acceleration of existing diseases, such as osteoarthritis. It will reduce the risk of other diseases developing, such as several types of cancer. And if sustained over the long term, it will make them live a longer life. And these sound like pretty profoundly important benefits. Might these drugs have some risks? Almost certainly. These drugs have fairly common side effects in people. The most common group of side effects fall under the heading of gastrointestinal, feelings of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And it's likely that we'll see a similar proportion of dogs presenting with those adverse effects. The drugs do affect the way the gallbladder contracts and ejects bile into the intestine. And that's something that we will have to watch in dogs to see if that could cause a problem. I mentioned before that the GLP-1 agonists affect the pancreas, and there's some concern that it may increase the risk of certain pancreatic diseases in dogs. So that's another area that will need to be evaluated very carefully if these drugs come to market. But one of the most concerning or simply the biggest question in regards to how successful they will be in the marketplace is compliance. The effect of these drugs stops as soon as you stop giving the drug. Therefore, either you need to continue giving it for the lifetime of the animal, or what is hoped, certainly by the veterinary profession, not necessarily by the drug manufacturers, but what's hoped by the veterinary profession is that owners that have been using the drug and then maintain an animal in a lean body weight for a period of time will then be clued into the fact that this is the amount that I need to give my dog to prevent it from getting fat. And as long as I don't give it any more food than this, it will not increase its body fat mass. It won't become obese again. Take the drug away, keep doing as I was. Even if the animal's appetite increases, I won't feed it anymore and all will be well. Now, we have reason to believe that that's unlikely to be the case, and that it is more likely that when we withdraw the drug, old habits will come back into play and the animal's weight will subsequently increase again. Not a bad thing if you're in the business of selling drugs to keep animals healthy. But if you needed to treat your animal for the rest of its life in order to maintain a lean body state, and you were successful in doing so, you probably represent a relatively small population of dog owners. After all, if your willingness to spend that money, and these drugs are unlikely to be cheap, for the rest of this animal's life, and your ability to sustain that and maintain that, your compliance as an owner is good enough, well, how many of those owners are there that weren't also good enough to have been able to feed their dog appropriately? It may seem a little harsh, suggesting that an owner is not good for their animal becoming overweight. But what I mean is that feeding a dog appropriately for its whole life requires a certain degree of attention to detail, compliance, and a certain degree of self-control as well. And if you're the sort of person that has that, you'll be the sort of person that can maintain drug treatment. You'll be committed enough for that sort of thing. But you're probably much less likely to actually need that in the first place. One of the reasons why I'm a little skeptical of how successful this drug will be in the future, or this family of drugs in the future, is based on history. Now, in the early 2000s, I think in about 2005, a drug became available to us, which is marketed under the brand name of Slentrol by the drug company Pfizer. Its generic name was dolopride. And this was a drug that was given as a daily pill, and it reliably reduced appetite and, in an experimental setting, achieved weight loss in overweight dogs. In trials using owned pet dogs, it was also successful in achieving weight loss, but in a slightly smaller percentage than was shown to be the case in experimental settings, which is often the case when we take drugs from the laboratory or colony situation to the big wide world. What was demonstrated in the study in the owned dogs is that as soon as the drug was stopped, most of the dogs started to increase their body weight. Now, they weren't followed through for a long period of time to see if they completely regained the weight that they had lost, but I would wager that the majority of them probably did. In other words, it didn't seem to be successful in training the owners to recognize this is all I need to give my dog, no more, to prevent that rebound in body fat mass. The drug sold significantly less than the drug company was hoping and probably had budgeted on. And compliance was poor in the long term. Pilling your dog every single day for the rest of its life, if you are unable to control the food intake of your pet dog, was a reason for people just stopping. They just didn't want to have to pill their dog every single day. Add to that the fact that the most common side effects that were seen with this drug were gastrointestinal. some mild diarrhea, some of the animals became a little bit nauseated, and people didn't actually like the idea that they were giving a drug that reduced their dog's appetite. And as a result of everything, the drug was actually taken off the market in about 2012. Now the question is, will these GLP-1 agonists be any different? They almost certainly will result in the same phenomenon of owners allowing their dog to become overweight again. They almost certainly will be more expensive than that drug was. And the gastrointestinal side effects are likely to be just as common. So I'm not sure that the promise of these drugs will live up to the hype. What's the best way for us to maintain our dogs in a lean body condition? Well, the first step is to recognize what a lean body condition is. We should all know what the body condition score scale is, how to judge our dog's body condition, and we should know what an appropriately healthy body fat mass or body condition score is. I like to maintain my dogs at a body condition score of about 4. And if a dog has a short enough coat, that means at that body condition score that you will be able to see their last few ribs quite clearly. So that's we need to recognize is a healthy body condition score. We also need to recognize that the trajectory to obesity starts very young. Animals don't grow and then maintain a nice lean body weight for a period of time in adulthood and then all of a sudden jump up and become obese later on. Both cats and dogs deviate at an early age and maintain that trajectory to being overweight throughout life. Now, we often overlook this when they're young and they're active and they're fit and they're healthy and a little bit of extra weight. Oh, he loves his food. We don't worry too much about it. It may not even be mentioned as being a health issue early on by your veterinarian. But the danger is that once they've set that trajectory to be overweight, it is much harder to get them and maintain them to be lean once they've established that body weight. There's no evolutionary reason for there to have been a protection against obesity. It simply hasn't happened. Animals, including us and our dogs, are not good at preventing obesity. That's just not evolved. And so we need to recognize that development early on and intervene on our dog's behalf. Once your animal has reached a mature adult weight or skeletal maturation, once it's fully grown and not overweight, that should then become the ideal body weight, and you should maintain that. In order to maintain that, you need to weigh your dog frequently, and I implore owners to do so. Weigh your dog frequently. It's an objective measurement that you can't overlook. The incremental increase in body fat often tricks us into not realizing that our pets are increasing in body fat. If we weigh them regularly, then we become alerted to that gradual increase in weight. Pretty well every veterinary clinic will have some scales in the waiting area that you can pop your dog on for free, or you can cuddle your dog if you can lift it up if it's a small dog and weigh them on your bathroom scales. Whatever means it is, I urge you to establish what is an ideal lean body weight for your dog and keep monitoring that throughout their life. That will safeguard against the development of obesity. And of course, in the face of disease, in the face of old age, once their body weight starts dropping, that is often the first sign of disease. And we often miss the earliest signs of disease if we're not weighing animals recently. But what about once they're overweight? How do we get them to lose weight once they are overweight? Well, step one is to recognize that your animal is overweight. Acknowledge that carrying that excess body fat causes disease. It increases the risk of important diseases, and it will shorten your dog's life. So once that is acknowledged, recognized, and understood, that is then the basis for the motivation for doing something about it. The next step is to ask for help. Veterinarians tend not to be particularly good at recognizing obesity and communicating that to owners. The reason for that is that when you present them for other illnesses, obesity may be a complicating factor, but it's not often the primary driving factor. And it'll often be mentioned as an extra thing that you could do in addition to taking this drug or that surgical procedure or what have you. We often mention animals becoming overweight or being overweight at annual health checks, but it's often couched in non-dramatic terms, because at that time it's not that dramatic unless you have a morbidly obese pug that's struggling to breathe. It's not a critically important issue at that time. So unfortunately, as a profession, we tend not to address this issue with the seriousness that it needs. But if you present your dog to your veterinarian and say, please, can you help me get my dog lean? Then we can help you and are more likely to be helpful. And know that simple caloric restriction will work. It will work. Here is a difference, a critical difference, I would say, between human obesity and pet obesity. It's not just churlish to say that it's our fault or your fault if you become overweight. It's also rather naive, and it misses the effect of the environment on our food intake. I said we haven't evolved any mechanism to protect us against obesity, but we've certainly evolved very accurate, exquisitely sensitive mechanisms to prevent us from losing weight. And if you do lose weight, your body has evolved programs to try and push you back to regain that body fat mass. It seems cruelly unfair, but it makes sense because evolutionary, we were never in an environment where we could become overweight. And as soon as you started losing weight, you needed alarm bells to ring to say, hurry up and eat. You're losing body fat mass and you're probably going to starve, or at least you're not going to be effective at reproducing. So we have this drive to maintain our body fat mass at whatever stable body fat mass it is. And when that body fat mass gets increased and maintained for a relatively short period of time, that becomes the next set point that gets defended. Now, this is not a problem if we're constantly searching for food and on the brink of hunger for most of the time. And thankfully, we're not in that position. But the flip side of that is where we are now, where we're in an environment of caloric excess. We're overwhelmed with eating opportunities. We can go to the fridge, we can go to the cupboard and grab a snack, grab an extra scone at the cafe when we go grab a coffee. There is every opportunity for us to continually to eat all the time and eat excessively. That is not the case, or should not be the case, for our dogs. Our pets eat the food that we give them. And it might be mean-spirited to say this, but we really don't have a good excuse for overfeeding them. There isn't that environmental pressure that we feel on ourselves. It genuinely is a different situation. Sometimes we find ourselves overfeeding them in order to assuage feelings of guilt. I feel that pressure sometimes. If you know you're going to have a busy day and you're not coming home late from work, there's that temptation to want to put a little bit more food in the dog's bowls in order to just satisfy them a little bit more, to fill up their tummies, and this image that they're going to lie around and go, oh, yummy, 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 thank you for that, and they're not going to be bored and disappointed. There's certainly times where I don't exercise my dogs as much as I should. And we have to celebrate the fact that needing to exercise your dog is a wonderful way to increase our own activity. Many people confuse food with love. I hate the term treats. I wish it didn't exist. Of course, manufacturing treats is a huge area, huge global business. And people spend eye-watering sums of money on treating their dogs every year. But food is not love. It is not treating your animal to give it food that it doesn't need. I would term treats unnecessary food. That's the only term that we should use. Now, of course, I treat my dogs, but I try and keep them as low calorie as possible. Apple cores, small baby carrots, and so on. And I recognize that it's not the food that's the treat, it's that interaction, the extra bit of interaction that I'm having with my dogs. So, unnecessary food, it's a real problem. But if we could cope with all of those things, if we didn't overtreat them, if we didn't associate food with love, if we recognized the lean body condition score and we weighed our animals regularly, could we prevent obesity in our pets? Well, I'm happy to say neither of my dogs are overweight, but do you think it has anything to do with what I feed them? Do I need to have a PhD in nutrition in order to recognize when my animals are getting overweight and reduce the amount of food that I put in their food bowl? Unfortunately, the prevalence of obesity in dogs across the world might suggest that we do need a drug in order to manage obesity. But obesity is a preventable disease. Our pets eat the food that we give them. It's us that are the problem. Obesity in dogs is a problem of human behavior. And certainly it's my continued hope that we can solve that problem without giving another drug to our dogs to solve it.